Caddis Maximus here, this time with a quick review of the Armstrong Type 260 or Model 260 hand pipe die stock. And this is going to be a gloved review because these tools are obviously kept very oily and very, not really greasy, but quite oily due to the nature. You have to use lots of oil when you're cutting pipe threads. And you always want to have these coated in a nice layer of oil because these are high carbon steel dies and they do last a long time, but they rust very, very easily. So you pretty much every time you use these, if you haven't even used it and it's been in storage, you periodically want to separate any of the dies if they're stacked together and give them some oil to keep a nice separation between any humidity or water from getting to the surface of the metal. Now this is just a incomplete set, unfortunately, but it was really cheap at a garage sale. It was like $10 or $15 or something, so I went ahead and picked it up. Manual die stocks, they still exist, but they look much differently now. The engineering's much different. They still have 4 independent teeth, but they're a little bit more progressive and easier to run. And really, when it comes to larger pipe sizes, an inch and larger, you pretty much aren't manually threading those anyway, just the amount of effort and time that it takes. They've pretty much all been taken over by power threading machines. Even Harbor Freight sells power pipe threaders that are kind of a handheld type unit, a knockoff of a much more expensive model. And that's, part of the reason is that these use 1-inch MPT handles, and they end up being pretty long. And then you have to have the special type of vise system in order to hold the pipe while you're threading it. So how these work is these are interchangeable block dies. How this is an incomplete set is they usually have really good increments from 1/2 inch through 2 inches. This is a 2-inch capacity, and they'd have it every 1/4 inch increment. And this set is pretty good up through 1 1/4 inch, and then I'm missing the 1 1/2 and 1 3/4 inch die sets. How this stays stabilized on the pipe is that there are these sleeves that are actually down the bottom. This is the 2-inch sleeves, and that's actually another portion that's missing, is that there's a series of sleeves for that match each particular die size. Speaking of the quality of this is a pretty nice die stock, but I believe it is cast iron because there's some really thin flashing down here, and that's not evidence that it has actually been forged. Although this is an older unit, probably made between somewhere in the 60s and 70s is what I'm suspecting. So we'll just show about this a little bit here. There is not many YouTube reviews of manual pipe threading die stocks, particularly Armstrong ones. Armstrong did sell quite a few of them, and I suspect because they were much more competitively priced than, say, the rigids of the era. And it does show they aren't made as well. I did a review of rigid pipe cutters and compared against the Armstrong 2-inch pipe cutter, and the Armstrong pipe cutter wasn't as good. But these are okay. They're just fine for what they're meant to do. So anyway, you have a series of dies. They're all labeled 1 and 2 for basically left and right, or the 2 halves, so you don't get confused with the other numbers such as the sizing. And actually, let me pull off my glove here. There are some nice things. Even you do have a standard Armstrong labeling in the casting, but I always kind of like these dies because they were really proud of it. They were genuine Armstrong, Bridgeport, USA. And then there's the rare trademark. You really don't see that very much on Armstrong tools except for the older ones. And these do have the handmade feel. I mean, they are hand finished and hand stamped. The sizing is. And what I find interesting, like right here, they had partially stamped the incorrect number, and then they just over-stamped it again with 3/4 inch. And that's actually not a criticism. It just kind of gives you the real world, somebody's hand actually was working on these. Now, being pipe threads, how these work is they have a slight taper. That way, when you screw the pipe in, it starts to cinch up nice and tight and help maintain sealing and prevent it from coming loose. It's actually a pretty simple system to use. You have these special square top shoulder bolts. That kind of is evidence of how old this is. Let's go ahead and get this a little closer here. And we'll zoom in just a little bit. And they're pretty simple to operate. These are special shoulder bolts, and they're actually designed to be pretty loose in the hole there. And the reason is that these dies, if we can actually look on this side, is that they have alignment marks. So when they machine the the actual cutting threads, they're done in relation to a mark rather than just the back of the die. So you would have these bolts with a wide flange on them. You have the dies in there. And then what you would do is go ahead and just use this adjustment screw to get that mark lined up just right. And then you would go ahead and cinch down the bolt. Now, to give an example of some of what you might run into to take out the die, it's super simple. You just pull out the bolt, you lift out the die. They have a little shoulder and a couple little flats that they ride on, so you'll want to wipe the back of the die and wipe down here, just to keep any grip, keep the die from wanting to not be aligned properly. Now we can put in a different die here, and it hasn't actually. I have to back off the screw a little bit. And so it's kind of interesting. It's evidence of some trouble maintaining manufacturing accuracy. And it was just easier for them to do in relation to a marking line, and then just have adjustment screws. Or a more modern one, you wouldn't have that issue. The die is just interchanged into a fixed position because they're manufactured with much more greater tolerances. Anyway, there wasn't a whole lot more to talk about this old hand-operated pipe threading, 2-inch capacity pipe threading die stock, but I kind of want to put this video up for people who are kind of into vintage tools, and for people who may have either seen this or maybe seen some of these dies and kind of wondered, what they were for. They do say RMPT on them, but this would allow somebody to at least identify what kind of apparatus they were associated with. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please subscribe. Catus Maximus out.